Hello and welcome to the Flix Forum podcast, where each episode we go back and we look at a Netflix original film in the order of release. This episode we have Netflix 325th film from 2020. It's the drama film Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, directed by George C. Wolfe. It stars Viola Davis, Chadwick Boseman, Glynn Turman, Colman, Domingo, and Michael Potts. I'm Jesse, I'm your host. Thanks for joining me today. Apologies for the nasalness. I've got a pretty ordinary sinus infection, so hopefully it's not too bad through listening. I'm going to keep it together as best as I can and talk about this pretty big film that Netflix put out way back in 2020. Considering, 4 years ago now. So we do start our show with the Fast Flicks, where we do a quick little summary of what the film is all about. As always, if you want to avoid spoilers, give us a pause and come back a little bit later on, because we will spoil this film as we go. So the Fast Flicks for this one is that this is the process of making a record with an ambitious musician who wants to steal the star, vocalist's light. That's probably the best way I can put it. Let's talk about how this one ended up on Netflix. This one's got a pretty good story, I guess. You got to start with that this is based on a play from 1982 of the same name by August Wilson. I'm going to talk about this throughout the episode, I guess, but I did have to sort of pause the film maybe 10 minutes in, because I had no context around this film and I just needed to pause and look it up and go, hey, is this actually based on a play? Because it's quite obvious and possibly takes a little bit away from this film as we go. But let's talk about this film. So the Black Bottom dance, which is in the title, it's a dance that originated among African Americans in the rural South in the first decade of the 20th century. It was eventually adopted by mainstream American culture and became a national craze throughout the 1920s. In relation to the film, Denzel Washington, he initially had his deal with the television network HBO in America to produce 9 of the playwright August Wilson's plays into films, with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom amongst those. So by June of 2019, the deal had been moved to Netflix, where Viola Davis, Chadwick Boseman, Glynn Turman, Colman, Domingo, and Michael Potts were cast, with George C. Wolfe set to direct. I guess it's sort of interesting too. The other Denzel Washington starring, I think, directed film Fences is another adaptation of the work of the playwright is what we'd call him, August Wilson. Maxine Lewis is a singer, and she did most of Ma Rainey's singing for Viola Davis in this film. Jeffrey Wright was originally expected to join the film as well, so some big names that were attached to this film. Filming for this film, it commenced on July the 8th, 2019 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with sets converted into 1927 Chicago, with filming wrapping up on August the 16th, 2019. Unfortunately, August 28th of 2020, Chadwick Boseman, he died of colon cancer during the post-production of this film, making this film, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, his final film appearance. And the film is dedicated to him at the end of the film, through text as well. The film, it was theatrically released in select theatres on November 25th of 2020, before streaming on Netflix from December 18th of 2020. Netflix also released a 31-minute making-of documentary called Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, A Legacy Brought to Screen, alongside the film. I sat down and I watched this as well, just to add some further context, and a nice little side piece that Netflix has put together with this film too. It sort of is broken into various sections. So it starts off with blues as a genre of music too, and then there's a little segment on Ma Rainey and her life. Then there's a little segment too about August Wilson, the playwright, and what he did, and George's vision, the director, what he wanted to bring to the screen, as well as that idea of bringing Ma Rainey to the screen. Talk about the costumes, the look, the style. Viola Davis talks about the inspiration she took in playing the role. Then we have this little segment on the rise and fall of Levy, who's the character played by Chadwick Boseman, and obviously, he wasn't around to, or maybe he was, I don't know if he filmed any segments for this documentary and they were just left out, but you could tell, I guess, throughout this this mini documentary that everyone that was interviewed sort of missed him as well. And the last little segment is that idea of the race records, which is sort of looks into that insight, or gives some insight into how African Americans were used and abused, I guess, by the music record scene. Paramount Recordings, I think, were one of the bigger ones, as well as that idea too that Ma Rainey was a strong woman and she knew what she stood for as well. Let's get back to the film. So upon its release to Netflix, the film was the most watched item over its opening weekend, so some big figures there. It was nominated for an awful lot of awards. It was named as one of the best 10 films of 2020 by the American Film Institute. The film also received 5 nominations at the 93rd Academy Awards, including Best Actor for Chadwick Boseman, which, if you remember, back to the ceremony, this was the last award that was presented at that ceremony, and a little bit of a ending that wasn't expected by most people because everyone thought Chadwick Boseman had this sort of in the bag, and Anthony Hopkins ended up winning it for, I think the film was called The Father from memory, and he sort of was remote dialed in with the acceptance speech. We had a nomination for Best Actress for Viola Davis. It also did win 2 awards for makeup and hairstyling and costume design as well. The film, it did receive 8 Critics' Choice Award nominations as well as 9 NAACP Image Award nominations, including Outstanding Motion Picture with Davis and Boseman, both winning lead acting awards there. Davis and Boseman also won lead acting awards for their performances at the Screen Actors Guild Awards, and this made them the first African-American actors in history to win in leading categories in the same year. They both also received nominations at the Golden Globes, with Boseman posthumously winning this Best Actor Motion Picture Drama Award too. So a little bit of a sad story with Boseman not being around to sort of, live in the glory of his performance in this film too. Let's look at some translations around the world. So in Spanish, it's called The Mother of Blues. I get that. Rainey is recognised. That's sort of her subtitle, I guess. In Portuguese, it's called The Supreme Voice of the Blues. Not bad. In French, it's The Blues of Rainey. That's all right too. In Greek, The Legendary Rainey. In Chinese, it's called Queen of the Blues. In Vietnamese, it's Miss Rainey's Blues. So all play on that title, including her name, as well as that idea of the genre of music, tying it in not only to the genre of music, but possibly some feelings there as well as to how she's feeling. As I mentioned before, this was released into select theatres from the 25th of November before hitting Netflix on the 18th of December 2020. The budget was about $20 million from what I could see. And as I sort of touched on to a lot of awards, it actually had 84 wins and a further 192 nominations. So some pretty big recognition for this film. What are the critics and audiences saying about this film? What have they said? So I guess pretty positive. If we look at it, like this is super positive. On Rotten Tomatoes, it's at 97%. That's on 319 reviews. Certified fresh, easily. Audience, a little bit lower, 72%, but that's on more than 1,000 ratings too. IMDb, it's very solid, 6.9 out of 10 on 58,000 ratings. Letterboxd, that sits at a 3.5 out of 5 on 126, nearly 127,000 ratings. It's been logged by 166,000 people, so some big numbers there. Metacritic, again, very positive. It's in that traffic light system, green, yellow, red. It's green for both the audience and the critics. The critics have it at 87 out of 100 on 46 reviews, and the audience at a 6.7 out of 10 on 180 reviews, also green. So very, very positive here. The taglines for this film, we had 2 taglines. One of the taglines was, "Everything comes out in the blues." Not bad. And the other one was, "It would be an empty world without the blues." So again, highlighting the genre of the music that's in this film. What are my early thoughts for this one? I had high expectations, I guess, based on all the awards recognition, what I knew about it. I obviously didn't know that it was based on a play. And I guess, like I said before, early on, I did have to stop to sort of check that it was, because it sort of did take me away from the experience at various stages. But in saying that, there are some standout scenes, and the performances, they're top notch, and what are really enjoyable about this film. So positive from me. Let's talk about the characters. We like to discuss the characters. What are some things that stand out? Obviously, this film is titled Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. So Ma Rainey, she is a strong, independent woman who knows what she wants and knows how to stand up for herself. She calls the shots. She takes control of her career. She not only does that for herself, but those that support her and surround her, and she won't have it any other way. She knows how much her actual singing voice provides her, and she protects it at all costs, because what she says goes. And that, I think that's a really strong thing that you take away from this film, because the only person she kind of feels threatened by is this guy called Levy, who's played by Chadwick Boseman, as mentioned before. And it's a really interesting dynamic between the two, because she's the lead. She's the one that is earning these guys all the money. And Levi, he's the one who has the big dreams. He hasn't been where she's been. He hasn't had to see the struggles that she's had. And we see that through his fast talking, his trumpet playing, which is often off. He doesn't follow the music. He wants to play his own version of the songs. And these ambitions of being his own lead man in his own band. But he has these trauma things in the background too, like these deep suppressed feelings about the white man and the pain that the white man has caused him when he was younger, and he does have very rash actions, because he's this black man who thinks he can be wild and get what he wants. And he doesn't like it when the older band members try to bring him in line or remind him that they've been there, they've done that, and what he's trying to do, they haven't had success with either, so they don't think that he can have that success either. And we see he's happy to spend his money, you know, he's happy to spend it on a new pair of shoes to add to that razzle dazzle and try to sell himself as an artist, even though, and it's really sad because everyone except him understands that the white man will only use and abuse his material. And when he has his music taken away, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, he has nothing. There is nothing there for him. The other band members, I guess we need to talk about Cutler. Cutler is the trombonist. He's the boss of the band almost, who sort of keeps the communication between Ma and the group going. And he has this good relationship with her, which enables him to add a voice to these band players. He also has these really strong religious roots, which play a big part in this film as well. Toledo's the piano player. He plays a huge role towards the end, which I'll touch on soon. The other guy, Slow Drag, is the bassist. Doesn't have too much to say, but he's there as well. The other sort of side characters, I guess, is that we've got Irvin, who's Ma's agent. He's this white guy who seems absolutely petrified of her, and I guess the reason of that is because he knows how much wealth she can bring him, so he will do whatever she asks, and she knows that too. Sturdivant is the other guy, Mel. He's the record producer who sort of refuses to meet the demands of anyone involved because all he wants is the money. Doesn't matter what Ma says, doesn't matter what Levy says. He knows his position in the world, and he knows, you know, in this time and age, he can do what he wants. Deucey May Deucey, she's Ma Rainey's girlfriend, who's not in it much, but she seems very impressed with the materialistic things that Ma can provide her. I don't know, I didn't really get the feeling that she was interested in her physically or romantically, because we do see her and Levy at some stage in this film sort of go off together as well. The other character, Sylvester, is Ma's nephew, who has this speech impediment, and she's committed to giving him a role on her record and him earning his own money, not just her giving or you know, gifting money to him based on her successes. She wants him to play a part in that success as well, so that's a nice little side character too. The director, George C. Wolfe, 9 directing credits. This is probably the biggest, but he did do that Netflix film Rustin, which also starred Colman Domingo as well, so another Academy Award favourite recently as well. So interesting to see what else George C. Wolfe comes out with as well. Okay, let's talk about some scenes. What are some scenes that stood out? What are some things I didn't like in this film? I think that, you know, it does remind you of a stage show at various stages, so it's hard, I've said that word too many times, but it does remind you at times, and it's hard to get away from that. But parts that stood out, I think Levi, he'd spent, as I mentioned before, he wanted these new shoes, and he spent a lot of money on these new shoes. And, you know, there's a stage where he gets really aggressive and upset, and he threatens to quit the band. And the band, they make these jokes with him that, you know, you're not going to quit because you need to buy polished for those shoes. So I thought that was funny. The rest of it's all pretty serious. I mean, Levi's story about his mum and the men breaking into the house, his dad not being around, him trying to fight, him getting sliced, his dad going after these guys, waiting for them, all to prove how he doesn't get spooked by white guys. Standing up to the band and telling his own story too. There's a scene where Toledo is sitting playing the piano and singing about, you know, African Americans coming from all different places across Africa, and he makes this analogy about a big stew, you know, the carrots and all the veggies in there, and it finishes with this idea that the coloured man is leftovers. Just so sad, so sad. There's a scene where Cutler talks about his faith, and I touched on this before, a very religious man, and Levy challenges it, saying, you know, God doesn't like blacks, and he pulls this knife, you know, threatening Cutler, saying, you know, where's God? Will he save you now? I thought that was really symbolic. There's this door in the practice room that we see Levy continually question, like saying, that was new, that wasn't here last time, and he tries to open it all the time, and when he finally does, this is when everything unravels for him. And, you know, that door, it leads to nowhere, and it highlights racism in America. I really thought that was really, really impressive. Toledo, towards the end, he steps on Levy's shoes, and, you know, just the complete and utter loss of control from Levy when he knows everything has sort of gone. That the idea that he's not going to make any money off his own songs, just completely sad, helpless. And finally, like, this ties in with that too. We get this shot of these white guys recording Levy's songs. That was just a heartbreaking way to finish this film. So yeah, there's some scenes that stand out. Not necessarily, you know, all very traumatic and horrible, really. The things that didn't work in this film for me, like, as I've said this a few times already, the moments where it just felt like a stage show, they're littered throughout. It just took away from what I want as a movie-going experience. And finally, the only other, like, it was almost, and this is a part of that staging as well, I guess. It's like they gave each person in their band their own little story, like just too stagey. I just didn't like those moments. Themes, ideas, motifs. What's this film trying to say? It's trying to say a lot. That idea of race, racism, the idea that talent and hard work can get you places, but there's still those struggles for respect, that idea of oppression. So sad. I like the idea about art too, that the happiness and meaning to life that music can bring, especially through the blues music in this instance, but that difference between performance for performance's sake, or putting your soul into your artistic expression and freedom. Obviously, religion plays a big part too, that idea about your faith and challenging that faith, and where does that faith come from? Obviously, the exploitation of blacks by whites, not just the music industry, I guess, but the actual scars these can leave, that we see through Levy, these scars that he has on his body. And that leads into that cycle of violence and trauma that are experienced by African Americans. Ma Rainey is obviously a strong female voice in a very male-dominated area too. And that idea too that change, this is a change. Things can change. Even if they're small and take time, there can be change. This was done really well throughout the film too, but that idea of heat, like all the sweaty recording rooms, the practice rooms, it just brings that tension even further. Very similar to how Spike Lee uses heat in his classic film Do the Right Thing. So that was done well too. And just that idea too, that there is more to life than just having a good time. I think that's important too. What did I take away from this film? This is obvious, but this sadly reflects the way that society still is. It's set in the 1920s, but and this is 100 years ago. This is based 100 years ago, and society's, like, the reflections in our societies today in this story. It's just so sad. I think that there's this good quote from Denzel Washington, who's the producer on this film, and he mentions this in that side documentary that I spoke about before. But he says, "The times have changed, but the pain hasn't." What an impactful thing to say. Questions, ponderings on this film for me. I think Chadwick Boseman, like, some of those scenes, he would have been performing, like, he was obviously ill when he was making this film, and you can see how skinny he looks, and just performing while he knew that his end was so close. Just so heartbreaking. Just a little thing to take away from this film too. I'm ready to wrap it up. We give the film a rating out of 5 stars on this show. For me, like, it never left my mind that this would work well on stage, and the enclosed spaces are purposeful to fit some of those themes and ideas. It did sort of remove me from the film watching experience, because there weren't these big grand sets. It was like those isolated little locations that kept bringing it back to me, the idea that this is a stage adaptation. But in saying that, the performances, Viola Davis, Chadwick Boseman, delightful. The themes, the ideas, what it's saying, super, super important. So I'm giving this film a 3.5 out of 5. Hopefully you've been able to manage and hang out with this chat. My ears are ringing, so I can barely hear myself. So I'm hoping this sounds okay. We are on socials. We have Instagram, we have Facebook, and we have X, formerly known as Twitter. The question I just wanted to put out there for our episode this week on socials is, Ma says that only black people understand the blues. Is this true? I think that the ownership that they take over this genre is so important. I think that rightfully so, it should be classified as their genre, and the feeling and emotion that goes into these songs, I think that's 100% true. So that's just my thoughts. Anyone else have any other thoughts? Please do let me know on the socials. Next week, we are back again with another pretty big film from 2020. This one is a science fiction film, and it's called The Midnight Sky. This one, it's directed by George Clooney. It also stars him, as well as Felicity Jones, David Oyelowo, Tiffany Boone, Demian Bichir, Kyle Chandler, and Kaolin Springle. That's what we've got next week, a George Clooney directed and starring film. I remember when this one came out too, so I haven't actually seen this one. I'm excited to do it. Hopefully you're excited to join me again next week. As always, thank you for sticking around for this one. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll hopefully see you next week.